welcome to. Whoops, there we go. Hi, and welcome to the NewbQuest podcast. I'm your host, Matt Mirafish, and on the show we speak with game developers and kind of hear stories about game development with an aim for helping people who want to learn more about the topic and want to learn more about making their own games. Today I have with me a sort of a legend in the games field, Tarn Adams from Bay 12 Games, who are the creators of Dwarf Fortress. How you doing?
I'm all right. I'm all right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I really appreciate it. And so, just jumping right in, I guess the for those who are not familiar with what Dwarf Fortress is, how would you sort of describe it to them?
Well, Dwarf Fortress is a video game that aspires to be a kind of fantasy world generator and simulator, where you could say take on some role, whether it's a single person or a civilization, just kind of run with it for a while and watch history unfold, and then your next game you would continue to play in the same world as long as you like and just see how things turn out. Now, we're just getting started on this, even though it's been 12 years. So you can play a dwarf fortress. That's why it's called Dwarf Fortress. So you can play a kind of colony of dwarves digging into a mountain, looking for minerals, making treasures, and fighting off opponents, trading with people throughout the world, that kind of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's if anybody who doesn't know about it, I strongly recommend that you check it out. Especially some of the stories that have emerged online, people kind of telling the stories of what's happened in the game. Some of them are just sort of incredible and very entertaining. It's a great way to kind of enter the world of Dwarf Fortress. And so, I mean, this is an incredible, unique fact about what you're doing. You're saying you're just getting started, yet you're 12 years in. I mean, is there any precedent for this? Has there anybody ever done a video game for 12 years and been, just getting started?
Well, the only there are a couple things I can think of, maybe three things I can think of. There's I kind of, if you look at the whole sort of roguelike genre, there's these sort of rolling dev teams for the most part that have kept things like hack going for 30 years or something. There's one called Unreal World from Finland, and same guy, one person, as far as I know, maybe some of his friends or whatever, but this one guy, Sammy, I think his name is, and that's been going since at least 1995. It's sort of this Finnish wilderness survival simulator. It's awesome. And the other things that I don't know anything about, but I know that they last a long time, is kind of these sports management simulators, right? And those can, yeah, I'm sure those can rival Dwarf Fortress in terms of complexity when you're playing like the off-season management of a football team and how the draft works and all that kind of stuff, right? So there are other things floating around. I mean, we're right up there with in terms of crazy devotion, but yeah, there are a few of us out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. Crazy devotion is a great term to use. I mean, I definitely, having read, what's your current time projection for getting to a kind of a 1.0 release?
So we've got this list of sort of features that we've established for sort of Dwarf Fortress 1.0 versus the other things that we've kicked down the road, which is apparently after the end of our lives or something down that far. But the just looking at the version number, which is heading towards say 40% done. If you just do the math, then it's going to be another 20 years. And that's a long time. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, I'm not saying I can predict the future, but that's just what the numbers say.
That's amazing. And so the team working on it, you are the primary developer, programmer, and then your brother also works on it with you.
Yeah, my brother and I have been making games together for as long as I can remember. I know we were working on stuff when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. Not that there was anything kind of playable or interesting there, but we were programming, and there was always games that we were writing. So and I'm 36 years old now, so that's been a long time, and so everything in the game we've kind of co-designed. Just we've always had kind of a game going, as things like space games going, other games going. Dwarf Fortress is the one that we actually kind of put together properly enough for it to make it anywhere. And yeah, so we basically talk things out, and then I program them.
And so, how important do you think? I mean, obviously, there's a one of the things that I think a lot of people struggle with, both getting into development and just kind of working in development, especially with smaller teams, is kind of maintaining focus and maintaining momentum on the project. How important do you think it is having sort of a team, in this case of two, but as opposed to kind of being just completely on your own?
It depends. It's really depends on your personal kind of makeup, I guess. I mean, I've written games by myself that kind of went through their full cycle, without my brother's involvement. And if you have a sort of vision of your game, and you want to see it through, you can do it on your own. But when you've got another person, you get that whole kind of interdependence, and people relying on each other can kind of naturally be much more motivated to see things through, and especially to be more careful in the details of. Just not totally screwing something up or going off on a tangent that is unhealthy, or a little myopic, maybe. That's one of my brother's main functions once I start programming a given feature, is to kind of make sure that I don't jump down certain rabbit holes that like how curly your arm hair is and that kind of stuff that our original released fantasy game, Slaves to Armagh God of Blood, was just me kind of going off on those repeatedly, and the whole thing crashed and burned.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting topic, because that was the kind of direct predecessor to Dwarf Fortress, right? And that was so one of the things that's kind of striking about Dwarf Fortress is the fact that it uses ASCII art, right? Character-based art. But Armagh 1 was 3D, correct?
Well, if you want to call it that. 3D, technically speaking, it was atrocious looking, but it was. I mean, it was interesting because we tried some procedural animations. You could walk on one hand and one foot, and it would kind of come up with a really bad animation for you before Spore kind of actually tried to do that. And you could rip the skins off the textures, poke eyes out, noses, and so on. Arms could be teleported away from the body, that kind of thing, and it would change all the textures. So there were some interesting things going on, but the graphics themselves were ugly, and it was very slow to maintain. If you wanted to do something we've got in Dwarf Fortress, like the fluid model, where you've got pressure and the fluid will go down one end of a pipe and come up the other end of the pipe, thinking of how to do that in 3D, especially back in when we were in 2003 or whatever, it was just not a solved problem, handled problem remotely by anybody. I mean, there's some cool games now that are kind of messing around with 3D fluids, and so the people are just starting to do that with larger groups of competent individuals and so on. But it's just not the kind of thing where you can go forward and add a lot of features to a game if you have to do the graphics for them too. I mean, the people work out these details when they've got teams of people that know how to work together. Then you can sort of get your division of labor set up, and you can move forward. But that requires kind of knowing what you want to do more in advance, having the details established, and sort of having a deadline and getting it all set up. It's harder to sort of move on your feet, because you can't just say, well, we're going to take all these graphic assets that you've been preparing for the last 6 months and chuck them. We would have done that multiple times if we had the 3D Dwarf Fortress, because I've just scrapped whole sections of the game and rewritten them. So the text graphics help us stay nimble, and it's it's a kind of something that I don't expect to change.
I,
Although, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think you said a lot of really interesting and important things there. I mean, I feel like the one of the things that's so interesting about your development model with the kind of extended time, the small team, extended time scale, and the kind of deliberate minimalism in some areas, in this case graphics, it that approach that you're taking of saying I want to remain flexible, I want to be able to pursue the threads that I want to pursue and chop off whole branches of things that haven't proved fruitful. I feel like that is one of the uh, I feel like that's something a little bit unique to games, being that they're kind of interactive systems. It's you don't really know what's going to be fun, and if you're just like, this is the roadmap, we're going down the tracks, and we're building the assets, we're building the art, and then you kind of get there and it sucks, and then everybody's fired, right? So I think it's a really interesting aspect of the way that you guys are approaching it. I mean, especially considering, one of the big topics that I want to talk about, which is the kind of heavy use of procedural generation in the game.
Yeah, I mean, iterative development, I guess, is what you call it when you get your game up to a playable state as quickly as possible. I mean, Dwarf Fortress was playable in some sense of the word the first day we were working on it. You could have your dwarves walk to this cliff face and dig little holes, and if you've got it, right from the beginning, then you get a feel for every feature you put in. You can do little tweaks all the time. I mean, I know our interface is horrible, our graphics are bad, but uh, at its core, the beginning of the game, especially since we've played that a lot, I mean, it still remained kind of compelling. Once you get over the hurdles of learning how to do it, it's still fun to mess around with, and to kind of get right into your dwarves digging and building their little workshops and stuff. And the ability to go back and change things and react yourself to your own game as you're writing it is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I feel like that is one of the we've seen it's almost become a kind of a brand name now, but we've seen the kind of rise of a kind of an independent or indie video game development movement. People doing small team projects, and I know that's something you haven't completely subscribed to that sort of brand or trend or whatever. But I feel like the just that thing of being able to control schedule and being able to kind of control the project has led to a lot of much more rich investigations of kind of mechanics and sort of deep a richer investigation of the interactive component of things as opposed to the kind of surface layer of, oh look, it's the shiny reflections or whatever.
Yeah, I mean I mean I guess it's sort of facile almost to say that if you have more freedom to do what you want, then cooler things are going to happen. But it's true, right? I mean it's like I mean that's true of anything probably. I mean if you're not constrained, I mean there are I guess downsides to that. If you I mean you're not going to get the little polish phase necessarily each time with every game, and sometimes people will just drop something and move on. But that's I mean that's not a huge problem, especially if you're not dropping $60 on it or whatever. So it's all it's I love what I'm seeing now. Even if I'm not into a lot of the games, right? Because there's so many, and people like their own things. There's such a wide range of things being done now that it's just wait to see what happens next.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's an interesting point. You mentioned, dropping $60 on a game. You guys are running on a free plus donations model, and last time I heard, you guys are supporting yourselves doing that, which is kind of incredible.
Yeah, it's we're living on it now. I mean, if you break it evenly between the two of us, it's about 25,000 a year. And so it's not a lot of money by Western greedy standards or whatever. Like, oh, I want to do this, but no, it's fine, right? I mean, I was a grad student for 5 years living in a room in a house or whatever. So it's for me it's more than enough money. I save money. It's crazy, but it's like, and people just send it in. It's cool. I mean, I love how it's worked out. I mean, it's not something you can say is going to work out, and it wasn't enough right in the beginning. And So it's it's really hard to say when you've got just this thing flowing around on the internet. What comes down to luck and what comes down to talent and what comes down. It's really hard to say, but we just stuck with it and it worked out so far. And anytime it seems like you could sink back into it not being supported, you never know what's going to happen. But it's a nice model because it allows us to give the game to everybody. Anybody can play it anytime, and we get 100,000 people downloading it every month or whatever.
Wow.
Even if we only get a couple hundred contributions a month, that's fine. It's cool to be able to interact with people without it feeling too much like customer service and so on. So it's a nice interaction. I mean, the money hasn't gotten between us and people very often, and that's nice.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. That how much of a different dynamic it is giving something freely. The relationship that creates with your supporters and your fans is, as you say, very different. I think that's a great point. The and then the other aspect of that's very interesting, right? It kind of ties back into this longer development cycle. You guys have been developing the game in public for quite a while, and having that kind of interaction and feedback from the community. How much of an influence has that been on your development process?
It's interesting because we were not public for so long. We've had this kind of fantasy game going. It was called Dragslay originally, like back in 1990 or something. When I was a kid, and Dwarf Fortress is roughly speaking the same general idea of this sort of procedural world that we've been running with for a long time. So the overall vision of what we wanted to do with the game hasn't really changed at all, but the interactions with fans have certainly shaped our focus sometimes when we have a lot of different directions we can go because we're just doing such a generic project. And sometimes it doesn't matter which way you tack when you're going to tack both ways eventually. And there's also all the stuff about interface bugs and that we do some work on occasionally. That they have almost sort of full control over. What happens there. And there's some number, I don't know, 10,000 suggestions now or something, and I've read almost all of them, and it certainly impacts the little changes I make to the game to make it more enjoyable for people.
That's awesome, and I feel like, would you this is obviously a larger and longer project than many people will attempt, but would you kind of recommend trying to get something in front of people sort of as early as possible, or do you think there's a kind of a point of diminishing returns with that?
It's hard for me to say, given my limited experience overall with the number of projects and having one that was successful and several that weren't. But I like it. I think it's good to have if you're developing something that you don't just want to drop and have it's sold for 2 weeks and then you're out, which is one way to go. Then you need to develop a group of people, and you need to do that by posting blogs and little videos and things, and people get excited about it. It's not something that you can really, you don't get a lot of negative hype before you release the game. Kind of, it's people are excited and want to look forward to something, and it's even better when you deliver. I keep a note file of every little promise I've made, and I don't break any of them. I as far as I remember, I try not to hype, and then now we're getting pretty close to release right now. I'm kind of doing my anti-hype to remind people that some of the things you've made up in your mind are not what's coming.
Right.
So you do learn how to sort of I guess it's just PR, right? It's not. You don't want to sound cynical about it or whatever, but it's you learn those skills, and it's good to have. You don't just want to be, unless you're one of these guys who does like a alternate reality game and knows how to play this weird persona where you're this mysterious thing or something, which I have no idea about, then keep it public. Then just do and it's going to, especially if you're funding. I mean, funding is so weird these days, right? Now that we've got Kickstarters and all that kind of thing going on, that I mean, a Kickstarter is all a sort of pre-release publicity campaign that then generates this kind of capital for you to continue on going, or whatever people end up doing with that money. Who has any idea? But it's all the same thing, right? It's we've been basically doing a Kickstarter for the last 8 years, just in slow motion. We give out backer rewards, if you want to call our stories and crayon art rewards or whatever. It's all very similar, and just I think that the kind of perpetual engagement is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's, I mean, that's actually something I think is very interesting about what you guys have done, because a lot of what's happening now with regard to these kind of things like Kickstarter and then Steam doing their early access now, that you can kind of publish games before they're done, and people kind of the consumers are kind of getting their head around that. I mean, you guys kind of prefigured a good amount of that with the way that you've been running Dwarf Fortress, which is pretty interesting to see. I mean, I think also there's an interesting point that you make there. I don't think anybody would describe you as a marketer or a PR person. Obviously, you're a developer, and a game designer, but the extent to which, as any sort of person creating something nowadays, the amount that kind, or when you have two people, the amount that kind of falls to you, I feel like that's an important thing for people to realize when they embark on a project like this.
Yeah, I've been longer than Dwarf Fortress is out. I've been an online community manager for 14 years now, because I've had this forum, and it's got thousands of active members, and they fight with each other. I've got to wade into gun control. I've got to wade into Ukraine. I've got to do all this stuff, right? And it's all, and it all ties directly back into how you're going to survive. So it's you have to be cognizant of that stuff when you're running a website. I mean, some of my friends out here are also developers, like, I'm not going to have a forum after they see what we got through. But I think the forum has been invaluable to us in terms of community building, especially because of the way that Dwarf Fortress relates to storytelling. And we've got a whole section where people can just have these community forts and tell the story of their fortress, trade save games with each other, and run different years of their forts and all whatever other ways they've invented of playing the game that we didn't even think of in advance. So it's you are going to be wearing a kind of PR hat, whether you like it or not, but that's just part of, I mean, being a human being, kind of just interacting with people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great point, and that's something I feel like it's interesting, because, as you say, obviously, like running a forum or getting involved with, it's the internet, so in many ways it can be a kind of a horrible place. But of course, it's also this way that community builds, and with you guys, I mean, it's a kind of a uniquely, well, it's a directly, financially, it's a directly kind of community supported project. And I feel like the community aspect of it has been very important. So that's it seems very relevant. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, sort of for lack of an elegant segue, is you're doing single-handedly doing the programming and creating this thing which has kind of created all these stories. The fact that people are telling stories to each other on the forum about what's happening in their game is quite unique, right? And a lot of that hinges on the fact that you've taken this kind of systems-based approach to world creation and then the kind of narrative that emerges out of that. What are some of the challenges of doing that? For example, I can imagine that like something like playtesting, is sort of infinite, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's one of the reasons we have so many open bugs, and some of them are strange and really hard to tackle. It's you add in a system and it interacts with any number of the other systems, and you just see that the part, I mean, it's kind of like unit testing or whatever, although I can't manage actual unit testing with just me. But it's you have a small piece, you work on it, it works correctly, then that's something. And if all of your little pieces work correctly, then the things you have to worry about are just bad interactions or other sort of macro level problems that aren't going to arise. And so I have another series of tests I do before every release just to make sure that I can trade with the caravan, something weird doesn't happen, make sure I can do this and that. It just sort of keep the whole thing sort of running, and then the bug reports will just flood in anyway. And just the nice thing about the way I'm doing it, and maybe this applies to a lot of procedural generation in general, is when you think about the real world and the fact that the real world has many more complex systems than you've got, and it all works. When you have a problem that you don't quite know how to tackle, and even if your game is a fantasy game or a sci-fi game, you can still kind of think back to how could this work, and you sort of imagine in your mind how what would be the real solution to this problem, and it's not going to always be a processor intensive thing or something that you have to model every little molecule or whatever. It's just there's some common sense, I guess, that comes into it about just nudging it in the right direction. I'm assured that this is not going to work when we get to economics, but we'll see how when people start starving to death and so on, we'll see what kind of little patches we have to put over things to keep everyone happy and healthy. But or at least to the extent we want them to, we still want famines and other destitution and so on. But
Other
just a
nice
reasonable
things like that.
yeah.
No, I
But,
think that's a very. I mean, it's a really this. There's been a kind of among, I guess, in the sort of indie games world, there's been a kind of a fascination with roguelikes recently, and a lot of people kind of hybridizing it with different other sort of mechanics. And I feel like I feel one of the things that's unique and so strong about Dwarf Fortress is you know admittedly you've spent a huge amount of time on it, but the fact that you as one person can create a system that then just creates and creates and creates, it's kind of an incredible sort of force multiplier for creativity, for lack of a better term.
yeah, it's I mean it's interesting because the use of procedural generation, if that's the part of roguelike that we're hanging on to here, because of course you can get in a fight about that, right? All these people arguing about permanent death or blah blah blah. But if we just go with procedural generation, then it is, I mean, as at its base, for a small project, it's just kind of a time saver if you want to look at it that way. The results can be kind of bad; they're not handcrafted, but they save you some money, and they increase replayability. Arguably, depends on how well you do it. But you have a different game every time. And then with us, we kind of added more and more of that to the point where we, at our ideal, it would be just kind of making a new RPG for you just from scratch. I mean, we had our little quip years ago that we didn't want just another cheap fantasy world. We wanted a cheap fantasy world generator, and we're not going to outdo a really tightly scripted plot. Except in the sense of sort of comprehensibility and not missing details. I guess we can outdo anybody there because the computer doesn't, forget the hair or eye color like George R. Martin forgot someone's eye color or something. There was a little tussle about it or something. It's like we're not going to forget that stuff, but of course we're not going to have this really tightly knit intrigue either. I mean, we can attempt it, and it's going to work sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be like just complete goofball stuff, but that's fine because we've kind of got that. It becomes charming, I guess, when things. But
Go horribly wrong.
so, it is really amazing what you can do. I mean, you just lose a little bit, and it's hard to kind of regain it. But it's just a different style of game, I guess, than one that has a scripted narrative.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, and this is just me kind of editorializing, but I feel like it's if I want a scripted narrative, I'll go read George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
He's doing that very well over there. And the things that games are bringing to the table are this possibility of interactivity, emergence, complexity, surprise. I forget. I was reading something about something that I think it was the result of a bug. Like the sheriff was supposed to chop somebody's fingers off, and then he lost his tool, and he ended up biting them off.
Yeah. He bit his arm off and just carried it around in his mouth for years.
I mean, that is just
Yeah,
incredible. Like
yeah.
that's you cannot write that.
Yeah, it was great too because it's like it was a bug. I think I may be misremembering, but I think it was just a bug report, and he's like, my hammer is carrying around someone's mouth and his arm. What happened? And or arm in his mouth or whatever. What happened?
Yeah.
And it's like then you have to go investigate. It's like what happened? And then you go all the way down through it, and you're like, oh, he just wasn't checking for his hammer when he went to go execute somebody. And then the rest of it just unfolds because it's called the combat code or whatever, and there he goes. So it's yeah, that was foul, but
No, I love to hear stuff like that, and I feel like that is well, George R. R. Martin is an interesting comparison, right? Because he's one of the things that makes like something like Game of Thrones really interesting is the fact that important people die.
mhm.
And in the kind of typical hero story, the hero is going to stride through and he's going to get a cut on his arm and a artfully placed cut on his cheek, and then he's going to go kill the dragon. And something that I love about games is the fact that like no, you don't know who's going to die. you know.
Yeah.
And
No, there are no plot shields or anything around characters in Dwarf Fortress, and that is where we kind of struggle to keep up a bit because at one extreme you can't kill any important characters in the game, right? They're just they may go unconscious if you hit them for 2 seconds and they wake up and then they give you the quest again or whatever, right? And there are other ones that let you do stuff like that, and then the game is basically over and you have to reload. And then there are some now that are trying to adapt their scripts to the loss of any character. I think the new Divinity game coming out is trying to do that. And then there's ours where it's anybody can die at any time. And the problem is, how does the AI react to this missing component, and can it be interesting, or are you just going to get more cookie-cutter text and so on, right? It's difficult to do the writing because there's so much writing that needs to be done,
yeah.
and it all needs to be generated in pieces. The sentences are all built up with little chunks, and so the writing can't be that good. And it's but as long as people can gloss over that like they gloss over every other flaming pile of problems we have, then you find something to enjoy and you kind of fill in the blanks. I mean, we always did that with games. I remember when we were younger playing this flight simulator. I think it was called Falcon, maybe it was Falcon 4.0 or something, where you flew just these little sorties, bombing things or whatever. But there was little units, little infantry units and tanks down below that you couldn't tell if they had sort of set up this entire war simulation or if they were just kind of plopping a unit here and there to fool you. And I believe when we came back and played it when we were older, we were like, oh, they're just messing with you. But just the illusion is enough, right, to make you, when you're not paying attention too closely, to just build this whole story in your mind about how when you bombed that facility, your forces moved forward and all this specific stuff happened and so on. And the more you add to the game, the more elaborate the filling in of the blanks can be too, as long as it's consistent, doesn't sort of break immersion. That is something to watch out for, and it is kind of part of the sort of iterative development process. Again, is just kind of checking for when things go a little too far, that sort of thing.
No, actually, that's a great point, and that was something that I wanted to say with regard to the ASCII art as well. I think that is there's an interesting kind of crossover point where, or sort of trade-off between abstraction and immersion. Where it's like the analogy that I thought of was, when let's say you're reading a novel, right, and they put a picture of the main character on the front, right, and once they've done that, that's what you're going to see running through the whole book, right, and it kind of just crystallizes this thing in your mind that you can't get past. And so in a way, the kind of abstraction that you guys are doing by eschewing graphics kind of allows a kind of a imagined richness to exist, in the player's mind without kind of over-determining it.
Yeah, and it's true that you can there is sort of this power of imagination associated with the text graphics like reading a book, but I mean these are like these kind of sort of played out arguments on our forum of people fighting about this kind of thing, right? So I don't want to get too partisan about it,
Yeah,
but
of course.
it's because there is it's like you can't devalue the graphics artists, right? I mean, they can
Of
do
course.
amazing stuff, right? So it's and you know, it'd be I mean, you're from your perspective as a musician, right? It's like I can make a procedural music generator. It's like I can play the black keys on the piano. I can do it. It'll sound great. But you know, it's not incredibly interesting at some level, but you know, sometimes rarely it will do something that's you know kind of amazing too. So it's all just this new mush that's hanging out, you know, with computer games and procedural generation. That's it's always cool to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was having that conversation with somebody, another guy, Sean Allen, who's doing a game, who I interviewed for the show. We're talking about pixel art, you know, and he's saying, oh, some people say it's really lazy, whatever. But, you know, I feel like in a way it has many of those same qualities where it has this kind of level of abstraction that allows you to sort of connect with it in a different way. I mean, another thing that I wanted um, to kind of dig into was, you know, story is obviously kind of, you know, in a way, Dwarf Fortress is this kind of story engine. Have you followed the work of Chris Crawford and his kind of explorations in this direction?
Well, someone will have to remind me.
Well, so
But
basically, he made this famous speech. He was one of the guys who founded the Games Developers Conference, you know,
mhm,
30 years ago. He did Diplomacy, Balance of Power, worked at Atari way back in the day,
mhm.
and then kind of gave this speech, sort of famous speech where he was kind of like waving a sword. Uh, and said and was incredibly critical uh, the about the kind of direction in games and the fact that, you know, why is it always we're kind of trying to simulate somebody shooting a gun as opposed to simulate, you know, people having social interaction, for
Mhm.
example. Or he was like, all games are just this like spatial metaphor and that's all it's limited to. And
Yeah, I remember that now. I don't remember the details. I remember kind of just sort of glossing over it and moving on or whatever, but I don't yeah, I don't know what he's doing now or what the deal is or anything. So
he's got this thing going called I think it's called the Storytron,
oh
which is
yeah, okay. Yeah, I
yeah.
don't know anything about it. I just remember it promises a lot and I don't remember what people have seen or what, you know, if because I found that it's difficult. We had these kind of games where we tried to write sort of it would make an interesting story from scratch, right? Where we had like this soap opera generator, we had this other kind of things that my brother and I were working on. We're finding now that it's like once you do sort of the hard work of building the world, um, so that there are things that have happened, there is a history, there is this stuff, then you put characters into it, the interactions can be a lot more sort of natural because you have something to work with, not trying to make sort of an AI that doesn't have a world that it lives in. Because otherwise, the interactions all sound too abstract. They sound forced. But if there's something under the surface, because I mean, it's just like with these books you read, right? There's always a lot under the surface that's not said. I mean, it's like a. I'm just looking at it. The biggest example would be something like Tolkien, where there's
Yeah.
this thing sitting underneath it, right? And you know, regardless of what you think of the writing or whatever with those stories, there's this gigantic sort of
The Silmarillion that's
non-tip of
sitting
the
under it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's yeah, it's funny that the Silmarillion is like oh,
Hey guys, sorry about this. We lost Tarn. Please stand by. Hey,
Hey, am I back?
yeah, you're back. Yeah,
Okay, I don't know what happened. The internet just
no,
dropped out.
no worries at all. Yeah, we were talking about the Silmarillion.
Yeah, the Silmarillion and Storytron and that kind of thing. Yeah, so I don't know where it cut out, so you'll have to guide me a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. No, I mean, I think I think your point there about kind of for lack of a better term, a kind of a bottom up kind of simulation that starts with. I mean, I was reading about the way you were doing some of the terrain, the Gama Sutra article or interview you did a few years back, where you're talking about the terrain generation, and in order to avoid like having a jungle next to a desert, that you have there's like temperature,
Yeah,
elevation, and
yeah,
there's
there are
parameters, and then
several
the
overlaid,
terrain
yeah,
sort of
draining.
arises,
Yeah.
draining. Yeah,
That was the big one because it's like the ones that are easy to think of are temperature, rainfall, altitude, right? The stuff that you think like when you just look at a map or look at a globe. And that doesn't tell you the difference between a forest and a swamp, right? And so you just read a little more about why swamps are formed, why this or that, and then you get more fields to put in. We're still far from where we should be on that, but it's close enough, and that's you have to accept close enough. That's why I have people pushing me on course or whatever. It's like instead of
yeah. I
being
mean,
yeah
that's
my
a
weather.
that's a
Yeah, go
great
ahead.
that's a great topic. I mean, especially when you're doing this kind of exhaustive simulation, you know, I mean, I guess you kind of answered it in saying that you have your brother there saying like, "Hey, dude, don't go into the molecules of the guy's arm," you know. Uh, but I mean, that's an interesting challenge, right? When to be able to say, okay, this is, we're obviously not going to simulate all the laws of the universe, but this is going to get us a kind of a.
Yeah, that is. Are we off again? I seem to be.
Oh, can
The
you hear me?
I can hear you now. The video started flaking out, so
Oh,
I
don't
don't
worry
know.
about it. As long as the
Okay.
audio keeps going, we'll be fine.
Yeah. So this is one of the big thing, especially when you get a programmer starting game development. It seems when a person who's used to sort of dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's and producing a white paper and saying exactly what's going to happen and this is the specification, this is how I'm going to set this up, and you can't really stick to that with anything but the smallest game that you're writing. You have to be able to move on, and you can't allow yourself to be paralyzed by perfectionism,
Yeah.
which is something that I had to kind of work through myself. And yeah, and perhaps I've taken a little bit too far. Now we've got the Dwarf Fortress interface and menus that could use a little parallelization by perfection, I guess. But it's a very tricky problem, especially when you're in a small group of people and you have to manage your schedule on your own.
Yeah.
You have to develop a larger view of what you're doing, and just cut and run. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's not going to be perfect.
No, I mean, I feel like that's, kind of going back to the graphics conversation. I feel like it's the things that you don't do are almost as important as the things you do. That kind of choosing those battles. That was something that was very illuminating for me, your discussion about moving away from 3D graphics and how that kind of freed you up to move very quickly. I thought was very interesting, and I think is kind of along those lines. I mean, that's like a large kind of category decision, but I think it's pretty interesting. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think it drives a lot of the independence being in 2D, for instance, or going with non-textured 3D graphics that just have kind of the colored triangles, that kind of thing.
yeah,
And it's as long as you have an aesthetic sense, then you can take that a long way. You can still make good decisions within sort of the more limited framework that you've chosen for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that idea of embracing limitations is a great point, and then kind of doing a deep dive in a narrow area, and kind of leaving some of the other stuff uh, out. I think, so one of the things that this is a kind of, if you sort of research advice for new developers, one of the things that everybody says, and this is kind of a funny question for you with Dwarf Fortress, but everybody says limit your scope. You know, scope is the mind killer, right? And I mean, I was wondering what you kind of had to say to that.
I do, coming from my perspective of having worked on, scuttled hundreds of little projects before I got to Dwarf Fortress, I do tell people it's not just like kind of limit your scope as sort of a life long objective for yourself, like kill all your ambitions, that kind of thing. But start with a small project to see if you like the second half, where you're making it into a game and you're showing it to people, and people are complaining about this crash bug or that bug that doesn't work, or you have to actually work a great deal to make it the game work, and make it fun, right? It's because that's not going to happen if you're just continually messing around with the base portions, and trying to write the end all be all of whatever genre or multiple genres you've decided that you're going to tackle and destroy forever. There are a lot of reasons probably why the turnover rate, at least last I heard, was 50% in the game industry after 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, there are some unforgiving things about it, especially I guess if you're working kind of the crunch time corporate environment or whatever. Um, but that's not the only problem, right? I mean, it's the there's this, even in all program, there's kind of the debugging taking the majority of the time part of it, and so on. So it's if you're not kind of cognizant of that stuff, you may be in for a rude surprise as your project kind of grinds to a halt and then just dies like so many have. Starting on something small just to kind of get a taste for it, and then from there, you know your limitations, kind of get a feel for what you can and can't do. But if you don't run some things into the ground, you're not going to learn how to keep them propped up, right?
Yeah.
I had a lot of projects die before this one, and now I feel like I could kind of keep it together. It's not
You
going
kind
to.
of steer away from those cliffs.
Yeah, yeah, and know how to. I mean, the thing with iterative development that makes it difficult is you need to know how, and a lot of this isn't like rigorous training or rules. It's just kind of getting a feel for it. How to structure or write a program so that you can add something to it when you want.
Yeah.
Because they don't necessarily react well when you go back and change something, or you may find you're rewriting the whole thing, and that's not good. So there's sort of a resiliency you can build into your code, and this is going for programmers here.
Yeah.
It's if you so I'd say you can work on small projects to get the feel for the whole the entire process, each step, but working on a large project is good. I think especially if it is just something that you're working on and you're going to let it die. People don't have the luxury of time that I had to do this when I had another job or when I was a child. Developing some of these things is easier when you just come home from school and work for 8 hours every day, kind of, on this sort of obsessively. Then that's a luxury. But it's I think as an adult you can also learn that stuff more quickly. So
Yeah.
it's it's important to just be sort of pragmatic and reasonable, I guess. But it's difficult to determine what that means.
Yeah, definitely. No, I feel like that's a great point, and that's definitely something that, I mean, the thing that I've found in sort of trying to teach myself stuff is that some of the some people are like, oh, just go and make Pong, And I'm like, you know what? Doing Pong, I'm just not gonna get pumped up about that. Like, I mean, yeah, of course, Pong is like historically very important, but like that's not gonna motivate me to sit for 8 hours. Like I want to do something cool, so that I can be excited
Yeah,
about it to put
yeah.
it in the work.
I think, and it's just that I guess with a lot, I don't know why it is. If it's something that, I mean, because it's certainly a bug that bit us, and Dwarf Fortress came directly out of it. This kind of idea a lot of people get about having an expansive, large project is what's cool or something, right? But there are a lot of small things, and it has changed a lot. I mean, now there are all these kind of game jams and 7-day roguelike competitions and stuff like that that you can. Just a second, my cat.
Yeah,
You
go ahead. Yeah.
idiot. Are you gonna drop that?
Cat
Are you gonna
visit.
drop that? You dropped it? All right, I'm gonna take this away from my cat is eating these earbuds, and I think he pried off a piece of them and was about to swallow it. So don't do that. All
Don't
right,
die.
so yeah, so I'm gonna have to hold these earbuds in my hand. I'll sit on them or something. There we go. All right, so yeah, where were we?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the game jams and the 7-day roguelikes and stuff like that. Have you ever participated in anything like that?
No, it's one of those things where I don't feel like I haven't released a project since Dwarf Fortress, basically. I mean, there were some porting things like Kobold Quest or whatever that was just to port Dwarf Fortress code, but it's hard now. It is really hard now. We have like 15 really really bad games on the website, and those weren't even our best ones. We never kind of polished off and released the best side projects we have, and we still work on some, but I kind of embarking on a sort of public vacation from Dwarf Fortress where I'm working on something that's not Dwarf Fortress is I haven't figured out how to do it.
Yeah.
just public relations wise or whatever. We are interested in other things, but it is hard. I mean, we had this concept when we were younger of sort of the 3-hour knockoff game. We kind
Mm.
of did this ourselves. We would just my brother programs, and so we would say okay, you write a game right now, and we did that as kids. We produced many games that way, and it's and you can explore an idea. I mean, telling someone to write Pong, I'd never tell anyone to clone anything. I mean, that's just not. It just seems boring as hell, right? But you can tell someone to just see, what they can come up with. I mean, I spent a lot of time on a tablet, not the new definition of tablet, the old definition of the paper ones that have
Yeah.
folding, like the paper that comes up. It's hard to speak to people these days. But just writing things on paper, writing down ideas for games, and then if you plan stuff out on paper, it'll program faster anyway. So
Yeah.
what was that? I don't know what just dropped on the ground. What did you do? Yeah. Well, okay. This cat is just obviously not getting enough attention. But
Destroy.
destroy. Yeah, something went on the ground. I'm not sure what it was. I'll investigate later and file insurance claims as necessary. But not that you can insure
Cat insurance.
cat insurance here. But it was yeah. It's yeah. You can do anything with a game. You can write a game about anything. So. A small project doesn't have to be a rehash.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that as advice because I do think there is people kind of get into this tunnel vision of games about other games, and it's this kind of, I don't want to say cloning, but like just things that are very derivative and very small iterations on things, and definitely, I feel like there's a huge territory that's unexplored of other mechanics and other types of things. I mean, among the things you're doing with Dwarf Fortress. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, which is interesting, is Dwarf Fortress has now been, many years into its life cycle, has now been recognized by institutions like the MoMA and the New York Times and some of these kind of august cultural institutions. And you mentioned somewhere, I saw you talking about it, that people are kind of referring to you as an artist, and you kind of said, well, that wasn't that wasn't what I set out to do. How do you feel about that at this point?
Yeah, it's weird because we just my brother and I just got back from there's the EMP museum here in Seattle. Is the this it's kind of it started, I don't know quite started with music, but now they do films, and they're going to do a video game exhibit in
Mm.
November. And we're not in that, but we're our little blabbering faces will be in that talking about games or whatever. We just recorded this interviews, and they'll just cut it up and use it however they want. And it's just this new thing that's happening, I guess. And it's not just happening to us; it's happening to a lot of people. That I think it's less about Dwarf Fortress and more about games being more broadly recognized by these institutions or whatever you call them.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the MoMA brought in 14 games, but they want to get up to 40. EMP is doing 80 games, and that's 80 individual groups of people that were contacted, right? So it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are kind of just seeing this sort of new form of recognition. It's like getting your first magazine article, getting your first podcast, your first interview, your first players giving you money, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just yeah, it's I haven't really thought about how to conceptualize it yet because I didn't really know much about the kind of traditional museum scene with other things. I was like one of my brother's friends was saying like how he'd kill to get one of his paintings in the MoMA or whatever. So
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
it's
no,
like
it's a
you'd
huge.
better understand what just
Appreciate
happened
it.
or whatever. Country. But so yeah, but it's still hard to conceptualize. I don't think anyone can really conceptualize it right now though because it's so new. I mean,
Yeah.
it's what does it mean? How is it going to play out? Who knows?
Yeah, no, I mean it's an interesting topic, and it's something that it's funny. I'm kind of two minds about it because there's on one hand, definitely in the indie scene, especially, there's a lot of people being like, "Of course, games are art. You know, how dare you not call games art?" And I'm expressing myself and all this kind of stuff. But then on the other hand, I have this feeling, and this is actually something that goes back to Chris Crawford as well. He was saying, you know. A big part of the reason that everybody is that many people are campaigning to have games recognized as art is because art is something that gets respect. Whereas video games, oh, that stuff will rot your brain,
Mhm.
that trash, whatever. And in a way, it's like I feel like I would almost rather just see, instead of trying to call it art, instead of trying to fit sort of the thing that we love being games into this existing category, it's like, why can't you just respect the fact that this is a game that's made solely for its own reasons, not for reasons of like I want to put it in a museum, and that's a kind of a valid thing in and of its. I mean, it's just my opinion, but
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like I think I'm not I don't follow this actually close enough to know the motivations of different people and so on. I haven't read enough little essays and things, but I mean forms of music and film and so on all went through this kind of process of banning and so on. Comic
yeah,
books, they all had these kind of ban processes and then this movement to understanding, and we have such kind of good historical records of all that stuff that when it comes to video games you just look at it and you know exactly the process that's going on.
yeah,
And it's easy to understand the different players and so on and why it's going on the way it is and how victory is basically assured. But at the
yeah,
same time, people worked to assure those victories, and so it's like you have to. I mean, should you be fighting it so much? It's so weird how meta it is, right? It's
yeah.
like
No,
because you
I mean
know
it's
how it plays out, you know how these struggles play out, but the people fought, and lost their livelihoods and so on in the other ones. And so it's yeah, it is so strange. But if things do seem to be getting better, I haven't heard lots of video game ban calls. We've got these museum
no.
things going on, so it's like the struggle is going well
I
to
feel
the
like
extent that there
that's
was one.
No, I totally agree with your analysis there. I mean, and I feel like a big part of it is generational. It's like now the people who grew up with games and know what a vital experience it is, whatever category you want to put it in, are now curating shows and museums and are saying, yeah, of course we're going to put this in here. This is an incredible thing. And a lot of the people who are kind of saying, "Oh, this is going to make you go on a murder spree and all this stuff," just it's just pure ignorance, So I mean, anyway, I don't want to I don't want to diverge too far into
Yeah,
that
I mean, and, and,
subject,
and, and
but
it is always easy to kind of analyze the worst, most, and by worst, I don't mean any value judgment. I'm just kind of the things that are pointed out, like a shooter type game or whatever
sure,
that plays into stereotypes or plays into kind of the lowest common denominator stuff that people point out, like a Roger Ebert or whatever that would criticize video games while at the same time
exactly,
being
yeah.
articulate about film. And it's just it is. I just wonder if it was any different from games at all, because I mean games commercialize faster than these other
Yeah,
industries, I think, because the infrastructures were already in place for it to happen, and once they reached a certain threshold, it just got sucked up immediately, and so I mean, I don't have enough knowledge or anything to say how that factors into it, but I do think it made the overall process a little different how it played out. But um,
no,
in any case, it
I think
seems
that's totally
yeah.
true. I mean, I think it is a little different each time just because of the history and so on. The moving on from that subject, looking back, I mean, you started programming games when you were very young, right? You said fifth grade or something like that.
Oh no, when I was 5 or so,
Oh
yeah.
my Lord,
Yeah,
yeah. So
it's like, I mean, it's one of those things where my brother has a better memory than I do of childhood and stuff. I try and remember back to my early memories. There are no memories where I didn't know a few basic commands or whatever. It's like back because my father learned programming so that he could kind of get sewage treatment plants actually up to into this new modern era back in the 70s or whenever he was working on that, and because they have a lot of lab work they do in analyzing numbers to keep people safe and so on, and there's a lot of number crunching, and you can really do a lot with computers in that
yeah,
and other fields, right? And so once he got into that and saw how much it was making changing everything there, it was sort of obvious at that point that computers were the future. That was going to be a huge part of life later on, and so he's like, well, I want my kids to know how to use computers, and so he started us up learning typing little games in the back of magazines that he bought. They used to have code in magazines that you type into the computer, and then it would have a
wow,
little game to play, which is weird because you kind of spoil the whole game as you're typing it,
you're like
and then you go
reading
and
it.
play it anyway. Yeah, it's like how it ends before you get to play it, and then you get to play it or whatever. It's really weird, but and they surrounded us with the early game systems, VIC-20s, and then into Atari, and then to Nintendo, that kind of thing. But also the personal computer and programming, all that kind of stuff is just part of my early childhood experience, and it never stopped
Yeah.
from there. So it was just really the thing that I did when I was at home or whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's really really cool to hear that. I wish my dad had done that. He did different things. Um,
I don't have any complaints about my parents. It seems like a rare thing, but I'm very happy with how I was raised and stuff. It was actually pretty cool.
that's awesome. You should be very very grateful for that. I can
am.
say the same, but I think we're about the two people on Earth
Yeah.
that can say that. So. And so I guess, I mean, this would be looking way back, but just kind of with the benefit of hindsight, looking to kind of maybe not your earliest game developer self, but your kind of past game developer self, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself if you could kind of jump in a time machine and be like, don't do this, or always do this?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say because that's like looking back on your whole life, right? So it's
Big
but I mean
question.
it's because I mean can you and then you have, if you're really getting into this thought experiment, it's like, what can you tell a kid, right? It's like, would I be like, you should be more pragmatic and reasonable? It's like, okay, that's a great idea. Let's tell the kid that. But because that's what it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, though. Is like, try and there's just, don't get off on these really specific tangents, and don't. But it's it is hard to kind of go back and second guess how things turned out, because I got really lucky. So it's like,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think one great, start early and spend 8 hours at the computer a day is a piece of advice.
Yeah, maybe I would have told myself to get out more.
You're right. Yeah, get some exercise. That is good advice.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, stop. Don't eat so much candy. Try not to become a diabetic because you're on your way.
Right.
And that kind of thing. Yeah. Don't tell yourself anything about games. That turned out okay.
Yeah, there you go. That's excellent. All right. Well, I think we're kind of coming to the end. I just have a few little silly questions. What's your daily schedule like? What's your routine for working on Dwarf Fortress?
Yeah, I mean, it was more interesting before, when I was kind of on my weird graveyard shift working into the night, but at this for this conference thing I went to in January, I had to talk at like 10:30 in the morning, so I was like, okay, it's time to switch my hours around. So and they've stayed switched for the last like 4 months, so it's my routine now is to get up at 8 in the morning, which is interesting because I never had done that for years and years and years. So I get up in the morning, I have to go straight to the computer and check to make sure the forum's not crashed or something, because it's terrible when it's been down for 8 hours or whatever. So I just check the computer and make sure everything is safe, look and make sure there are no super urgent emails, that kind of thing. That just takes a few minutes. Go out and get coffee, get a sandwich at the local coffee joint here, come back, and ideally I can put on some like Nintendo music or whatever, something with fewer words these days, because I have enough music with words now on my my music player that I haven't heard some of the songs in a while, and then I get caught up in the words or whatever, hearing them again. So I go with wordless music now, and I'll try and work for a good sort of 3 hours. Maybe that'll take me to 11:30 or noon or whatever. And then go out, get lunch, and handle this checklist. I have this giant checklist now here.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the column is a day, and these are the things I have to do every day. And that's just because I forget now. I forget basic stuff like doing laundry and all that kind of thing, right? Because I've got too much going on.
It looks like Dwarf Fortress, your checklist.
Yeah, I tend to that fits right in, right? I tend to get sort of focused and make little systems, right? And so I do my checklist. I feed the cat, and all that kind of stuff. And that only takes about 10 minutes if you're diligent, go down the list or whatever. And then I've got another, say, 3-hour programming section, just however long my music list lasts. The one I've chosen is usually 2 or 3 hours. Check off some more stuff. And music is I can't really work without music anymore. That's how it's developed, and because it kind of cuts off the mental chatter, and I can just kind of disappear into what I'm doing. Although if it's planning, stuff that happens later in the day, then it's like the more silence, the better, right? So it's strange, but around, it depends on the type of work schedule I'm doing, because I can burn myself out pretty easily doing 6 hours of bug fixing, which is what I'm doing now, just straight bug fixing for the release. So these days, then I've been going over to my brother's place during the second half of the day and kind of doing. There's 3 or 4 hours of other work that needs to be done during the days now, making, depending on how bad the forum has been, going and looking at Twitter and looking at suggestions that people have made. And going reading different emails and handling the various requests and things that come through there. It also kind of sorts itself out, and then if I'm lucky, I'll have some hours at the end of the day to kind of blow off steam on a side project, or just talking about whatever we're working on in the game. And those are the days I go over to my brother's place. Some days I just stay here and just try and do a kind of Dwarf Fortress programming only day, and those are intense. Just kind of getting lost in it for all day basically with very minimal interruptions. You can spend 15 hours or whatever, and emerging from it, because when you can set aside a chunk on a calendar like that, because you can't always keep that focus up, right? And that's a really I found that I have quite a bit of that, just talking to people. The ability to kind of focus on something for a long time seems to be one of my strengths. But so to the extent that that's possible, just kind of disappearing for a day can kind of have you overwhelmed. I mean, I found I'm pretty slow thinking about stuff. I found this with math too, that there are a lot of very quick people in math, especially. I mean, you learn quickly when you go to the grad school in math, where you fit in and where
Where you
all these
are in the
the
hierarchy of
genius hierarchy, especially in math. I mean, it's very clear, like that you're not, if you can't multiply two 4-digit numbers in your head together or whatever, but at the same time, I was good at overcoming. Solving problems, just kind of thinking about them. And a lot of mathematicians this way. You think about the problem, and then you're not getting anywhere on it. Think, not getting anywhere at all, but you know how the process works, so you don't feel discouraged. Just bang your head against the wall, and then you wake up and you'll have the answer in the shower in the morning. That's just how it works. And programming is the same way. You can, there's a lot of routine programming that you can just kind of do, but when you're coming to like trying to design a dungeon that maps itself out a certain way, or trying to write the conversation engine so that it works a certain way or whatever, and you're not quite figuring it out, then just you have to work and spend that empty time kind of stoking the fire of your subconscious, and then it will handle things later on. So putting in the time is very important. Even if you don't feel like you're making it anywhere, you eventually become better at things. Same thing with practicing instrument or whatever, like with the guitar or whatever, you just get better. It's same with anything.
No, I think that's great advice. I mean, I definitely have had that experience where you kind of set a problem in your mind, and then you're kind of like walking down the street, and it's just like, boop, here it is. It just like kind of comes out of the oven, and you're like, oh.
Yeah.
It's so weird the way the mind works.
Yeah, so you just have to remember. Yeah, I mean, and everyone's going to work a little bit differently, so you have to. I mean, it is just part of the self-discovery process. Just figure out what works for you, and some people know themselves well, and other people have to figure this stuff out, and you don't just put the time in, and you'll be able to do it.
Yeah, and then related to time, I mean, one of the things that I think. One of the threads that I'm seeing among certain people who are kind of doing interesting work is, how much of the fact that, trying to think of the way to phrase this, but like how much of a role does lifestyle play? Because obviously you make some trade-offs, right? By saying, okay, we're not going to sell the game, we're going to live on donations. How much does the lifestyle that you lead kind of afford the freedom to kind of work the way you work and work on the project the way that you work?
Yeah, I mean, I've made a lot of kind of time trade-offs or whatever. I mean, I'm pretty extreme about it actually. I mean, I don't have a relationship. I don't do many things with many people. We've got one guy we hang out with here, once a week. We go over to his house, watch movies for a couple hours or whatever. But there's a lot of time that's been put into this. I think it is as we've kind of gone over, it is sort of an odd, exceptional case because we do have such a large project, and it is apparent that if we want to accomplish what we want to accomplish, we do have to put the time in, right? So it's it's not something that you have to do. Coffee, don't forget coffee.
Coffee's
that
great.
kind of thing, because I always try and have a cup of coffee before one of my 3-hour programming sessions because it'll go about twice as well. That's just how it is.
Yeah, totally.
And so find your proper drugs of choice and so on to continue with your process. But I'm not sure. I mean, lifestyle is kind of general. I don't know what else to say, but
it's super general. But that's kind of where I was going. I just think it's I feel like in any kind of creative pursuit, the I'm interested in the kind of holistic aspect of it, of not just what you do at your desk, but then the rest of it. And I think that's a great answer. Um, do you have any regrets about the path you've chosen?
Uh, no, no. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't want to get into the George W. Bush thing where I'm like, I have not made any mistakes during the course of my presidency. I can't think of anything. No, it's not like that. But it's I think things are going well, and I feel really satisfied with how the game is going overall. It's certainly. I mean, I have I have nothing to complain about. It's going very well, and I think yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to second guess. I
Of
mean, I've
course.
made. I mean, you could go back and look at a bunch of questionable decisions I made. I mean, do I regret the weather model? Yes, I regret having two flowing air masses that determine how the fronts work, and it makes like cirrus clouds properly before the overcast warm front. And you could look up in the sky when you're playing an adventure and tell what the weather's going to be like based on the cloud patterns. But all it really says is when you're in Dwarf Fortress mode, it's like it is raining. And like
that's
okay, you
that's
know,
the output.
yeah, that's the output. It's like this giant black box that has all these working parts, and then it's just like it is raining, it is snowing,
That's
the
kind of
sky, the weather is
awesome.
cleared. And as, so there's. I mean, that just goes again back to my thing of knowing when to move on.
Absolutely.
And if we're burning 5% of the processor on something completely superfluous, then that's not a good idea. But so I mean, those kind of regrets abound in the dozens. But the overall course, I can't really second guess.
Awesome. Well, nor should you. Well, I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time to talk. It's been incredibly interesting, and just want to wish you the best of luck with the future of Dwarf Fortress and any other projects you choose to embark upon. Before we go, if people would like to get a copy of Dwarf Fortress, follow up with you online, where should they head?
They should go to bay12games.com. The game is free. They can download it. Doesn't have an installer. You have to know how to unzip a folder or whatever, and you can run it. And
Awesome.
yeah, enjoy yourself. And remember to consult wikis and online tutorials and everything to get over the horrifying interface. And you may find something you enjoy there.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Tarn, and yeah, best of luck.
Thank you.
All right, cool.